history, Montana history, you name it. One of the first experiences that I can recall that really had an impact on me was when I went to Washington, D.C. when I was in junior high. I found myself fascinated with being able to walk where our forefathers had walked, to step on ground where battles were fought, not only to form our nation, but where they were fought to keep our nation together. And I found myself spending my souvenir money buying replicas of the Declaration of Independence and colonial money replications when all of my friends were buying t-shirts and coffee mugs. And I think with this trip, that's when I pretty much knew kind of what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so, fast forwarding to the fall of 1998, when I started college, I was asked to declare my major by the end of my first year at Carroll College. I took a variety of classes, but ultimately I chose my major in history. I had no idea how I was going to make a living with this degree, but I knew I enjoyed history, and it was a way that I could get through school while doing something that I really enjoyed. In the summer of 2000, I had the opportunity to apply for an internship working in Virginia City, Montana, as a curatorial assistant at the newly constructed McFarland Curatorial Center. And I was fortunate enough to be one of 2 Montana students selected to intern, the other student being an archaeology studies major out of the University of Montana in Missoula. And the position required not only working on site in Virginia City, but required living there as well. And as it usually happens when you move somewhere new, you get to know your neighbors, which is where I first learned about this man named Charlie. Everyone I met was always talking about Charlie. And now I was born and raised in Montana. I'd learned about Virginia and Nevada cities and their history as former mining camps all through elementary and high school. I'd even visited these towns before. However, I had never heard of Charlie. So over the course of the summer, I learned a lot more. I learned that Charlie was Charles Bovee, and that he was responsible for a great deal of the preservation in in Virginia City and the reconstruction of Nevada City. I learned that the state of Montana had purchased most of Virginia City and Nevada City from Charlie's son Ford in 1997, and that my job was created by the Montana Heritage Commission with the primary purpose to help initiate the inventorying and cataloging of this huge purchase. When my summer internship ended, my fascination and my curiosity about Charlie did not. I wanted to learn more, and I was fortunate enough that during the fall of 2000, when I returned to school, there was an opportunity to do just that. I returned to Carroll for the fall semester, and one of the course options available was to intern at the Montana Historical Society in the archives. I was fortunate enough to be chosen for that position. And while I didn't know when I applied for it exactly what I would be doing, when I started, I found that my job was to process the newly acquired and very extensive Charles A. Bovee collection. And while my curiosity about Charlie had been piqued during my summer internship in working with the collection in the archives, I became so interested in his story and of his preservation efforts in Montana that this story ultimately became the topic of my honors thesis. And while I don't have the time to share his whole story with you this evening, I really hope you enjoy some of the following highlights. Over the past 200 years, there are a lot of great figures who've been immortalized in Montana's history. Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, Charles Russell, Jeanette Rankin, just to name a few. And though these names are familiar to many, there are also those people whose contributions to Montana have been just as great, yet whose names go largely unrecognized. And while only a few may recognize the name of Charles Bovee, he truly was a man who had an unprecedented impact on the preservation of Montana's living history. Charles Argus Bovee was a wealthy Minnesota native who came to Montana in the 1920s. He was a businessman, a farmer, a rancher, and a politician. Most significant, however, was his lifelong devotion to preserving facets of Montana's neglected and in some cases nearly forgotten history. Bovee's pioneering efforts have resulted in the restoration of Virginia City, Montana's second territorial capital, the preservation of individual landmarks in many Montana cities, such as Fort Benton and Craig, and in the formation of several organizations dedicated to continuing the efforts that he began. Charles Bovee is better known as Charlie, and he had a privileged life due to his family's substantial wealth and his father's generosity. His father, Charles C. Bovee, was president of the Washburn Crosby Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And despite all of the affluence the Bovee family enjoyed, Charlie, even at age 5, could be found rummaging through waste paper baskets and garbage cans looking for discarded treasures. In 1919, Charlie purchased a World War I Jenny airplane engine and propeller from a popular mechanics magazine. And with this purchase, his mother put her foot down and decided he could no longer keep his expanding collection of treasures at home. Consequently, rather than giving up his prized possessions, Charlie moved his collection to his grandmother's residence. And it stayed there and continued to grow in size until he had the collection shipped to his Sunnyside Ranch in Montana in the 1930s. Some of the items that Charlie amassed during this time, after moving his collection to his grandmother's, included horse-drawn carriages, buggies, and antique fire engines. On September 11th, 1923, like his father, grandfather, and brother before him, Charlie entered the Phillips Andover Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. The time he spent at the academy for him was not pleasant. Despite the constant encouragement and support he received from his father, he found it very difficult to concentrate on academics and was, as a result, a rather poor student. Needless to say, for him, his graduation in 1926 could not have come soon enough. And as a reward for finishing school, his father gave him money to take a trip to Europe. Upon returning from Europe, he met with his father again, who then gave him 2 options. One, he could go to Harvard or Yale, and his father would pay for his schooling. Or 2, Charlie could learn the milling trade and begin preparation to take his father's place at Washburn Crosby. Charlie chose the latter in the belief that he would be able to remain in Minneapolis, close to his family and to his precious collection of treasures. No sooner had he made this decision, though, than his father, much to his surprise, sent him out west to Great Falls, Montana, to work at the Royal Milling Company, a subsidiary of the Minneapolis-based Washburn Crosby Company. Charlie arrived in Great Falls in the morning of October 27, 1926. A few days later, he attended the funeral of Charlie Russell, the nationally acclaimed Montana cowboy artist. And this event had such an impact on Charlie that in 1940, he actually was able to purchase the horse-drawn carriage that had carried Mr. Russell to his grave. Nearly a year after arriving in the Great Falls area, Charlie met his future wife, Sue Ford, who was the daughter of the wealthy president of the Great Falls National Bank, Lee Ford. And though Charlie tried his best to learn the milling trade, after only 2 years, he was tiring of the business, and he began to consider taking up another profession, maybe farming, maybe ranching instead. Unfortunately for Charlie, his father did not approve of his son's desire, and Charles C. thought it would be best for his son to continue to pursue a career in the milling business. Charlie, though, chose not to follow his father's advice, and with the help of Lee Ford in June 1929, he purchased the Sunnyside Ranch in Great Falls and established it as a wheat farm. And while Charlie was working to change his profession, he was also continuing to expand his collection of antique vehicles. Some of the purchases he made during this time included a 1908 Anderson motor buggy, a 1909 air-cooled Cameron, and a 1903 Dodge Roadster. Only a few short months later came the infamous stock market crash in October of 1929. The crash, however, did not seem to have an immediate effect on Charlie. Despite the poor economy, he continued to lead a rather privileged lifestyle. He was still turning a profit from his Sunnyside Ranch, and in 1936, this profit allowed him to buy a sheep ranch near Monarch, Montana called the Deep Canyon Ranch, as well as a small cattle ranch near Cascade. Not only was he adjusting to his new career, but he was also making significant changes in his personal life. On February 23rd of 1933, Charles Bovee and Sue Ford were married, an event that almost never happened, or at least not on that particular day. Charles Bovee had never been one to pay really close attention to detail, and his wedding day was no exception. He forgot all about the marriage license. Luckily, he was able to convince a friend to open up the courthouse, write him a license, put the official seal on it, thus avoiding a potentially embarrassing situation. A major turning point in Charlie's life came on September 18th of 1940, when he was on his way to Fort Benton to attend a horse sale. On his way, he stopped at a little cafe, and while there became sidetracked. Charlie was introduced to the daughters of Joseph Sullivan, a saddler who had died years before. The women wanted Charlie to see the saddle shop that their father had owned, and Charlie, being the antique enthusiast that he was, accepted their invitation. He was fascinated with the shop and its contents. The women ended up signing over the deed to Charlie, and he began making arrangements to move the building to Great Falls. Needless to say, he never made the horse sale. It was the first time in Charlie's life that he had taken on a project that required that he pay incredibly close attention to every detail, as this building had to be dismantled in such a manner that it could be reassembled once it reached its new location. By December of 1940, all the pieces of Sullivan's saddlery had been moved to the livestock pavilion at the Great Falls Fairgrounds. And during the following months, Charlie devoted most of his time to collecting old buildings from various locations around Montana and moving them to the livestock pavilion. By August of 1941, he had collected such buildings as a barber shop from Elkhorn, Montana, a fire station from Boulder, Eberl's blacksmith shop from Augusta, and a saloon from Belt. He decided to use these buildings along with pieces from his automobile collection to create an exhibit that he called Old Town, an exhibit that remained a popular attraction for nearly 20 years. This display was often given high praises for being a place where the Old West could be experienced firsthand. In 1942, Charlie decided to enter the political arena. He ran on the Democratic ticket in Cascade County for a seat in the Montana House of Representatives for the 29th legislative session. He was elected and represented Cascade County in the House for 2 terms. And after serving those 2 terms, he decided to run on the county ticket again for a seat in Montana's Senate, a position he won and served for 6 terms from 1947 to 1965. He was most noted in the legislature for his concern regarding the elderly and the mentally handicapped, and his fight to pass legislation to benefit these groups of people. And although this was an important issue to Charlie, it was not among his main goals that he hoped to accomplish while he was in the legislature. One of his main goals was to create an organization to preserve the important facets of Montana's living history. In his first term in the House, he worked to put together a bill that would, quote, set aside such historic communities as Virginia City, Bannock, Fort Shaw, and Fort Logan in the interest of keeping early day history intact. Charlie firmly believed that Montanans were, quote, proud enough of their colorful history to cooperate in the formation of such an organization. And though this bill was never introduced, Charlie did succeed in creating an organization dedicated to preserving Montana's history, the Historic Landmark Society of Montana. Before the formation of the Historic Landmark Society, Charlie had attempted to preserve historic buildings in Montana on his own. He visited the Goodrich House Hotel in Bannock and offered to reshingle the roof of the building, providing supplies and labor for free. The community surprisingly turned down his offer. They were fearing that Charlie would try to acquire a lien on the building and take it from the community. According to one person, quote, no one could believe that some man was wandering around the country with an offer of free roofs. It sounded like an aluminum siding salesman with a new twist. Thus, to solve his dilemma, Charlie created the Historic Landmark Society of Montana on July 29th of 1944. And the organization's official purpose was to, quote, preserve and restore historic landmarks of Montana, to encourage widespread public participation in Montana historical study, and to hold, operate, and maintain these properties. Charlie was elected president of this new organization and served in the position until his death 34 years later in 1978. The organization was designed to raise monies through donations and memberships. However, not long after its incorporation, Charlie realized that it was just simply not possible for this society to sustain itself and exist through donations and memberships alone. As a result, he invested a great deal of his own money in the society throughout his lifetime. And one of his contributions included giving all of the profits from the admission charges to Old Town to the Historic Landmark Society. The society began its work almost immediately after its inception. The first job undertaken was the restoration of the 1877 Stickney sawmill near Craig, followed by the preservation of the 1855 Antoine Junot cabin near Fort Picken. The organization also played a key role in the efforts to restore and preserve Virginia City, Montana. Charlie's work in Virginia City consumed a great deal of his time and the society's time right from the beginning. After his first visit to Virginia City in 1944, Charlie was very disturbed with the rapid deterioration of the little town near Ennis, Montana. As a result of the shortages during World War II, most of the aging structures were being picked apart board by board for firewood. Charlie was appalled at the lack of the appreciation that the community seemed to have for these amazing pieces of history. And so he made a decision right then to do everything that he could do to prevent further destruction in the area. Upon arriving in Virginia City for the second time in October of 1944, Charlie approached Virginia City's Vigilance Club to try to convince the members of the importance of preserving their own town. Though the club could understand Charlie's concern, they had no money to invest in the effort, leaving Charlie disheartened. It was on this visit, however, he made his first purchase in Virginia City. Before leaving the area, he jumped on the opportunity to purchase the Henry Blake House for $100. Rumors of this sale spread quickly through the small community, and soon many other Virginia City property owners were selling out to Charlie, who had discovered quite by accident that the best way to preserve these historic buildings was to buy them himself. By July 1945, Charlie and the Landmark Society were working hard at restoring Virginia City, a task that Charlie would devote the rest of his life trying to finish. The first major restoration project that the Society undertook in Virginia City was the restoration of the Montana Post building, which had housed Montana's first newspaper. After the restoration of the Post was completed, Charlie moved his personal collection of antique printing press equipment into the building to provide the Post with a flair of authenticity. It was in this newly restored location that Charlie began publication of his own newspaper, the Montana Post, which was used to update the public on the activities of the Historic Landmark Society. The location would eventually be used to print copies of the original Post issues from the 1860s for souvenirs, as well as to print posters to advertise tourist events once Virginia City evolved into a tourist attraction. As restoration efforts continued in the area, Charlie became more and more interested, not only in preserving the history, but enticing people to come to the place. He incorporated the Virginia City Trading Company in 1946, and soon found himself making plans to open a hotel, though it was not something that he was very enthusiastic about. To Charlie, modernization had the potential to take away from the authenticity of the town. The Fairweather Inn, which opened for business in December of 1946, sported a new look inside and out. A coal furnace had even been added to try and entice winter travelers into Virginia City. Though it was a novel idea, many travelers remained unwilling to attempt the drive through Montana's treacherous mountain passes just to visit the deteriorating remote town. Those who did come to visit rarely stayed long, because there was no place to eat. As a consequence, Charlie added a restaurant in June of 1947. By 1948, a great deal of Virginia City was in the process of being restored. In order to better accommodate the influx of tourists, Charlie restored the Bale LaHaye Saloon and the Gilbert Brewery. He also restored a variety of shops that the public could walk through. And he filled these vintage stores with antiques and mannequins representing early 1800s, so that a walkthrough would be as authentic as experience as possible. Virginia City had become a very popular attraction by the end of the 1940s, especially after Charlie added entertainment to the things to experience in Virginia City. The Virginia City Players, a slapstick comedy group, soon rose in popularity with the public. And in 1951, Charlie purchased an antique Cremona photo player. The 19th century multi-instrumental music maker allowed the public to hear authentic music of the Old West while enjoying the performances of the Virginia City Players. As of May 2012, this Cremona photo player was still being used to accompany the Virginia City Players and was one of only 2 fully functioning instruments of its kind in the world. While many tourists were frequenting the Virginia City Players, Charlie was also beginning to work on another large project. Since his Old Town exhibit in Great Falls was no longer popular, he'd been asked to remove the display to make room for other exhibits. Charlie decided the perfect place to move this display would be to Nevada City, Montana, located only 2 miles from Virginia City. From an old photograph, Charlie began reconstruction of the old mining camp using pieces from Old Town, as well as from other exhibits and structures throughout Montana that would help make the town complete. One of the most popular structures Charlie was able to acquire was a 2-story outhouse. Although he was becoming more well-known for transforming Virginia and Nevada cities into tourist attractions, Charlie's preservation work in the area was not going unnoticed. The public showed great affection for Charlie, and he constantly received letters of praise and appreciation for the work he was doing in these little towns. In 1952, Charlie and his wife Sue were even presented with honorary degrees from the University of Montana for their outstanding contributions to preserving the state's history. The 1960s passed quickly for Charlie. His calendar days were always full of projects that he started, others he'd almost finished, and still more that he had not yet begun. He sold 2 of his ranches, keeping only the Sunnyside Ranch, reinvesting the monies from these sales into Virginia and Nevada cities. And though these little cities yielded no profit and were maintained for all but 1 year at a nearly $20,000 a year loss, Charlie was determined to continue to work to preserve them. His efforts culminated with the designation of Virginia City as a National Historic Landmark in 1961. In 1970, Charlie was asked for the first time if Virginia City could be used as a movie set. Charlie was thrilled with this idea and readily gave his permission for scenes from the movie Little Big Man to be filmed in Virginia City. Though this request was the first, it would not be the last. Not long after the Little Big Man filming, Charlie hired John Ellingson, a Great Falls native, to help him with the restoration of Nevada City. As part of this, Charlie wanted to include a memorial to the Chinese when he rebuilt the town, because he felt that they had made significant contributions to both Virginia and Nevada City mining camps, as well as to the West in general. In addition to preserving the Star Bakery, the Bynum House, and the Finney Cabin, the only 3 original structures that were still left in the original Nevada City, Charlie added his memorial buildings that included 2 Chinese stores, a laundry, and a temple, all of which were acquired and moved from other locations within Montana. The last few years before Charlie's death were very hard on him. He'd been forced by the IRS to start charging admission to Nevada City, as well as fees to ride the railroad that connected the 2 cities. He also had to raise prices in his restaurants and hotels to cover the tax bill. In order to charge admission to Nevada City, he had to construct a fence around the town, something he hated to have to do. He felt it took away from the atmosphere that he wanted the area to possess, and consequently took away some of the enjoyment Charlie felt in managing the place. In 1972, Charlie hired Jay Midget to take over the management of Bovee Restorations, and John Ellingson had relocated to Virginia City, where he has lived and worked as the curator ever since. This gave Charlie more time to enjoy what he loved the most, to be with the people and to be with his town, rather than having to worry about the business aspects of the operation. On June 9, 1978, Charlie died of a heart attack at his home in Nevada City. Jay Midget continued to manage business operations in Virginia and Nevada cities, after which time the management passed through many hands. Sue Bovee remained in Virginia City to help out wherever she could until her death in 1988. Sue and Charlie's son Ford was next in line to take over the properties, a job he hired Kirk Hansen to help perform. Kirk remained manager until the properties were sold to the state of Montana in 1997, largely due to the efforts of John Ellingson and the Montana Historical Society Foundation. Upon acquiring the properties, the state set up an organization through the Montana Historical Society called the Montana Heritage Preservation Commission to care for and maintain the properties. Since the death of Ford Bovee in 1999, the Montana Heritage Preservation Commission, the Montana History Foundation, and the Virginia City Preservation Alliance, along with John Ellingson and Pat Roth, who have been curators for the area, have been working diligently to continue to preserve the history that had been rediscovered by Charles Bovee back in 1945. Charles Bovee was truly a pioneer in the preservation of Montana's living history. And although he died in 1978, his dream did not. Charlie's dream of being able to preserve a piece of the Old West for the enjoyment of the people of the state he so loved continues today through the efforts of many individuals and organizations that he inspired. Charlie was able to instill in John Ellingson, for example, his theory of a suspended state of deterioration, meaning a building's condition should be held in check, but not restored. Walls lean, roofs sag, the wood continues to fade under the sunlight. According to Ellingson, Charlie's preservation efforts have resulted in Virginia City having one of the best collections of what's referred to as new old stock, or old things still in their original boxes. And it's one of the best collections in the country. According to Pat Roth, who I had the pleasure of working with during my summer internship in Virginia City, as of 2015, there have been more than 250,000 artifacts that have been cataloged in Virginia and Nevada cities, and their presence there is largely due to the initial preservation efforts of Charles Bovee and the ongoing efforts of John Ellingson. When reflecting upon Charlie, his accomplishments, and the legacy he left behind, one ought to take a moment to consider these words that were spoken in his eulogy. When one thinks of Charles Bovee, one tends to speak of his accomplishments: rancher, senator, Historic Landmark Society, Virginia City, Nevada City, preservationist. Perhaps, though, one has to keep these incredible accomplishments in perspective and remember that the accomplishments did not create the man, but rather the man's abilities, love, and nature created the accomplishments. Thanks to Charles Bovee, his devotion to preserving Montana's history, and the legacy of the importance of living history preservation, Virginia City, Nevada City, and many more of Montana's nearly forgotten historic treasures will be enjoyed for many generations to come. I'd like to take a moment now to invite you to take a look at some of the photos that I obtained through the Montana Historical Society that depict Charlie's story. I also brought with me a full text copy of my thesis, which is up here on display as well. And at this time, I'd like to open up if anybody has any questions. I'll do my best to try and answer them.
Is the entire city owned by the state of Montana, or are they privately owned residents in Virginia City.
Yeah, in Virginia City, there are private residents, but the historic structures are owned and operated by the state of Montana. The community of Nevada City is in its entirety owned and maintained by the state.
When you were looking, did you find any buildings from Broadwater County? I thought I had heard that a couple buildings maybe from Toston were in Nevada City. Did you ever find anything?
It's very possible. I know that through his efforts, he brought in buildings from a lot of the small Montana towns. You know, as far as a specific building, I'm not certain on that.
Thanks.
Amy, not so much a question as a comment. If anybody has been to Lavina, Montana, which is about the size of Raidersburg, but has an incredibly historic hotel, which of course is very decrepit now and in the process of being restored. But Charles Bovee, when that hotel became unused, acquired the bar from the Adams Hotel and had it moved to Virginia City. So those are some of the things that he did to preserve Montana history.
I know he had a lot of buildings from all over, and it's just incredible when you go to Nevada City. It's only 3 of the buildings in the entire reconstructed city of Nevada City were from original structures. All of the rest of the buildings that are down there came from Montana towns. There are no out-of-state buildings. They're all Montana buildings that have been moved and relocated, restored, and preserved down there.
Is the area, is Nevada City still fenced off and charged?
I believe that it still is. It's still operated solely as a tourist attraction. The only person who is permitted to live there is John Ellingson, because he's a curator emeritus, and he had been living in the city before the acquisition, but he is the only permitted residence of the tourist attraction.
You pay to get into Nevada City, don't you?
That's correct.
You do not pay to get into Virginia City.
That's correct. That's correct. Because Virginia City is still an incorporated town. It's not solely a tourist attraction, although the majority of the business and livelihood of the community is generated by the tourism industry.
What were his profits out of the area that the government decided he needed to start paying taxes on?
It was determined that he was running a tourist operation, and so it had to be taxed as a tourist operation. And with the increase in the taxes being classified as a tourism community, he had to make certain changes to comply with the IRS and their requirements for operating a tourism base. Any other questions?
Amy, what building was it that you helped catalog artifacts in?
My internship down there was during the course of the excavation, restoration, and preservation of the Sour Beer blacksmith shop. And so I was one of the very first interns down there, so we started with a new computer program called Past Perfect, which is designed for cataloging historic artifacts. And as part of that, we found, the other intern and I, that most of the categories to place these artifacts under just simply didn't apply to what we had in Montana. And so we were rebuilding within the system to try to make it fit what we needed, and ended up doing interlibrary loan for antique books on different blacksmithing products. And a lot of them, we even imported some interlibrary loan books from Europe, because they just simply didn't even exist in the United States to be able to catalog some of the artifacts that were found in the blacksmith shop. And one of the really interesting pieces that the excavation crew and the archaeology crew found when they were excavating to be able to help restructure the building is they found a little Civil War button with Lee and Grant shaking hands. And it's one of the only buttons left in existence of its kind. But they're finding all kinds of treasures as they go through, and they reinforce the buildings and reinforce the structures and things. They bring in the archaeology crews to make sure that they're not overlooking and missing those type of artifacts.
So, summer you stayed there, where did you stay?
I stayed in a little cabin in Daylight Village, and I use the term cabin very loosely. It did have running water, but it was pulled directly out of Daylight Creek through a hose, so it was ice cold. The other intern and I, who were sharing this cabin, were lucky enough to convince Pat Roth to give us the key to the curatorial center to use the emergency shower that was housed there. That's because it had hot water. So once a week she permitted us to go in and have a hot water shower. And there was no electricity in the cabin, so we did a lot of barbecue and a lot of eating downtown in Virginia City, which is how I got to know the neighbors and know the people in the town. Is, you know, when you're there visiting with them and eating out almost every night.
Was that in Nevada or?
In Virginia City, in Daylight Village along Daylight Creek there in Virginia City.
So was Nevada City a real city, or did he just create that?
Yep, Nevada City was a real mining town. It had just deteriorated a lot faster than Virginia City. Virginia City is kind of where the population of miners congregated. It was a little bit more profitable. Nevada City wasn't quite as profitable for the miners, and so it deteriorated faster. It was more of a camp than it was a city, and a lot of the buildings weren't built as sturdy as the ones in Virginia City, and so they deteriorated much faster to where there was only 3 original structures left by the time Charlie found it. And you know, as I mentioned, the Historical Society had a lot of old photographs, and that's where he had found pictures of Nevada City and tried to do his best to recreate it in the way that it was, and tried to find buildings that would fit the structure as seen in the photographs.
Is the museum still open?
I believe that it is still open. I don't know the hours of operation or anything, but the Virginia City Preservation Alliance is housed in the museum, and so I do believe it is still open, but I just
And is the train running?
that I don't know. I don't know if the train is still running or not. It's been a while since I've been down there. So I'm not really
I think it
sure.
is.
I kind of think it is, but I don't think it's the original one that Bovee was operating. I think that they brought in a big antique engine a number of years ago, so I don't think it's the original one, but I think that there is still some sort of transportation option between the two
I think it
cities.
runs from Nevada City to Virginia City and back, I think.
Yep, yep. I think you're right. Any other questions, comments?